Okay, we are on lecture number 8, Zoroastrianism. So the subtitle is that Zoroastrianism is a bridge between Asia and the West. This is an ancient Persian tradition that influenced Buddhism and Hinduism, but also immensely influenced the Abrahamic faiths. And the Abrahamic faiths are the three traditions we'll cover after this one. Um, they include Judaism, or the faith of the Jewish people, Christianity, and Islam. So we'll talk about those connections shortly. So it's a religion from ancient Iran, and Iran used to be Persia. And today, it's there's only a small minority of remaining practitioners. There's only about 124,000 to 190,000 remaining practitioners. So it's a major world religion, not in terms of how many practitioners there are today, but in terms of how influential this tradition was historically. So here's a quote that kind of explains that. Its origins are synchronous with and similar to Hinduism. It is thought to have influenced Buddhism, and it introduced beliefs that are similar to those later found in Jewish, Christian, and Muslim religions. So it is an early form of monotheism. It doesn't start off as a monotheistic faith, and you'll remember monotheism means one God, so it means belief in one God. But Judaism, which is the tradition that Christianity builds off of, the Christian Bible, the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible is the majority or the bulk of the Bible. That tradition started off in a similar way where it was not monotheistic but became monotheistic later. Possibly it became monotheistic because of Zoroastrian influence. And Zoroastrianism is arguably the oldest form of monotheism ever. So early in the faith, however, there were many gods representing elements, aspects of nature, and abstract principles like justice. And these gods often corresponded with the Hindu devas, or deities, and were similarly named the devas. So there's some overlap between Hinduism and early Zoroastrianism as it was a more polytheistic faith. The highest gods in Zoroastrianism were called the Ahuras, and that just translates as lords. Zarathustra's mission. So the tradition is known in Iran as Mazdayasna, which means the worship of the wise Lord Ahura Mazda. Western scholars refer to Zoroastrianism by the name of its great reformer, the prophet Zarathustra. And in Greek, Zarathustra is named Zoroaster. So that's where we get Zoroastrianism. So it's acknowledged, it was a tradition acknowledged by Greeks in the time of Plato, to the extent that Zoroaster was considered a great prophet by the Greeks. And Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, lived between 1800 and 1500 before the Common Era in Central Asia. So this is an extremely ancient religion, almost 1,000 years or more older than Buddhism, older than Confucianism, older than the great Hebrew prophets. This is an extremely ancient form of monotheism. So it's like the first form of monotheism. So Zoroaster or Zarathustra saw the Indo-Iranian deities, or those devas, as attributes of Ahura Mazda and strengthened it as a monotheistic faith. So all the lesser gods became attributes or emanations of Ahura Mazda. And Zoroaster spoke of a cosmic battle between sustaining and destroying forces, and humans were spiritual warriors. And he wrote down the gathas, which are metric verses adoring the supreme. And there are linguistic and thematic links between the gathas and the earliest Vedas. So there is a lot of overlap between Hinduism and Zoroastrianism. That's why it's this bridge between Asia and the West, because it influences Hinduism and Buddhism, but also the Western faiths as well. So you may have heard of the Magi in Christianity. They were Zoroastrians. So the Magi were a tribe of priestly specialists in Western Iran who practiced magic and astrology. And they were involved in the transmission of Zoroastrianism after Zarathustra died. However, they altered it. So Ahura Mazda was revered by the Persian kings, including King Cyrus. The Persian Empire was extremely influential and powerful during its time. Persia was known for unprecedented religious tolerance. We'll talk about this when we get to Judaism, how they lived under Persian rule. So Jews were allowed to practice their own beliefs, but adopted some Zoroastrian beliefs that were absent from earlier Judaic religion. So this is a big deal. These are beliefs that originate not in Christianity, not in Judaism, but in this ancient Persian faith of Zoroastrianism. So from a historical perspective, it is possible that the Jewish faith and the Christian faith would not have these beliefs if it were not for Persian occupation of Jewish land and Persian influence in Judaic religion that's then transmitted into Christianity. So these beliefs include that there is an evil aspect in life, that there is an immortal soul. So in the Jewish faith, in Judaism, there is no concept of an immortal soul. That comes a little bit during Persian influence and was popular among the Jews around the time that Jesus lived. So Jesus absorbs the concept of an immortal soul, but it really was absent in the Jewish faith and is absent today, aside from the time period where Zoroastrianism was influencing Jewish thought. Also, the concept of a reward, or punishment in an afterlife. So the concept of heaven and hell originates not in Christianity, but with Zoroastrianism. And this was a concept, again, from 1800 to 1500 before the Common Era, almost 2,000 years before Christ. The Zoroastrians were following Zarathustra's teaching that there was a heaven and a hell. Zarathustra also spoke of a final resurrection of the body at an apocalyptic end of the present age. So the idea of the apocalypse and the end times comes from Zoroastrianism, and the idea that there will be a final resurrection of the body at this apocalypse comes from Zoroastrianism. So these beliefs were then passed on to Christianity and Islam. So again, these major beliefs, there's an evil aspect in life, an immortal soul, reward or punishment in an afterlife, the apocalypse, and the final resurrection of the body at the apocalypse. All those beliefs originate not in Christianity and not even in the Jewish tradition, but in this ancient Persian religion of Zoroastrianism. And the Persians occupied Jewish land, and when they did that, it influenced Jewish thought. And at the time that Jesus was born, there was Zoroastrian influence in Jewish thought, and so that could be why these beliefs were transmitted into Christianity. And then we'll talk about the relationship between Islam and Christianity and Judaism. And so then it makes sense then that Islam would have these beliefs as well. So Alexander the Great is known as Alexander the Accursed in Iran because he ransacked Persepolis, the major city. He destroyed temples, he burned the library containing the holy scriptures of Zarathustra, and killed so many Zoroastrian priests that oral transmission of many scriptures may have been lost. 200 years later, Zoroastrianism reestablished a smaller empire by the Parthians. Under them, the surviving teachings of Zoroastrianism were reassembled as the Avesta, or holy texts. And then Zoroastrianism became the state religion of the Sassanids of the 3rd to mid-7th centuries, serving the aristocracy of Iran, quote, and was thus one of the major religions of the ancient world. So its ancient significance cannot be underestimated. Islam later spread to Iran and threatened Zoroastrians. Some who avoided conversion fled to Western India, where they were called Parsis, which means like Persians. You have the Pahlavi texts, which were written in Middle Persian from about the 9th century, and these offer details, rituals, and customs of the faith. A small community of believers still survives in Iran, but there's no way it's over 200,000 remaining practitioners. Zoroastrian teachings, the primacy of Ahura Mazda is important, and Ahura Mazda, the high god, is his name is masculinized. It's of the masculine gender, and he is one eternal being, but has 6 divine powers that radiate from the Godhead. And these powers were often personified and worshipped as separate deities. But again, the Zoroastrians were the first of the monotheists of the Western traditions. By far, way predates the monotheism that develops in Judaism and therefore Christianity and Islam. They believe in the choice between good and evil. There's a cosmic dualism where Spenta Manu is the good spirit and Angra Manu is the evil spirit. However, evil is not all-powerful or eternal, yet human beings must be spiritual warriors. And human beings are given free will and the mental capacity to choose between powers, whether good or evil. Other main teachings, again, are heaven, hell, and resurrection. So you're judged at death by your thoughts, words, and actions, not by Ahura Mazda, but by a natural law, kind of like how karma operates in Hinduism and Buddhism. However, this is big, so they originated the concept of hell, but for Zoroastrians, hell is temporary, because at the end, at the apocalypse, when good triumphs, good is ultimately victorious, and all those in hell become reformed, and there is no need for hell anymore. So that's an interesting concept. And then you have Frascio Careti, which means refreshment of the world, where good has triumphed and there is perfection and the illumination of aging and death. So at the apocalypse, all of reality is perfected. So there's no point in hell, and it's not like totally otherworldly. This world is transformed as well. Some religious practices. Rituals are the major elements of Zoroastrian practice. One quotidian involves tying a sacred cord around one's midsection 5 times a day, symbolizing girding oneself as soldiers for Ahura Mazda. Women and men wear the sacred cord called the kusti, for women and men are treated equally in many ways in Zoroastrianism. They're both spiritual warriors. Rituals emphasize purification, and purification is often symbolized with the use of water. Fire is also used for its transformative power. There were fire temples that were accessible to believers only, and certain chambers of those temples were only accessible to high priests within the tradition. A tower of silence is a place where you take the dead, where dead bodies are taken to be picked apart by vultures. And the last tower of silence is operating in Mumbai. And I checked that like a couple of years ago. I don't know if it's still operating. That'd be something that you could look into. But as of a couple of years ago, there was a last tower of silence still operating in Mumbai. Zoroastrianism today. Conversion is not emphasized because they don't want to dilute the teachings among people that didn't originally practice the tradition, and they want to keep their identity as a distinct faith community, and it's important that you're descendants from Zoroastrians within the faith, so they don't focus on conversion. And training is still available in Iran and India for the hereditary lineage of Zoroastrian priests. So the only question I have for you is, what beliefs from Zoroastrianism influence the Abrahamic faith? So the Abrahamic faiths, and we'll talk about why they're called the Abrahamic faiths when we get to them, but they include Judaism, or the Jewish faith, Christianity, and Islam. So these beliefs would be an evil aspect in life. The immortal soul is a concept that is introduced into Judaism through Zoroastrianism. It does not originate in Judaism. A final resurrection of the body at an apocalyptic end of apocalyptic end of the world. Those are all beliefs that are originate in Zoroastrianism, and also reward or punishment in an afterlife, heaven or hell. It'd be important to note, though, if you mention heaven and hell as Zoroastrian beliefs, it would be interesting to note how in Zoroastrianism, hell is only temporary and is overcome, and everyone in it is reformed when the good God, Ahura Mazda, and Spentu Manu triumph over evil at the apocalyptic end. So that is it for Zoroastrianism. It was a short one because it's not a major world religion today, but it's important to understand how influential it was as an ancient religion.